So good evening. Thanks for remaining. That's great. That's a good achievement for me. Tonight I would like to share my experience because there isn't, let's say, like in microservices, a lot of literature and a lot of information how to deal with micro-frontends. And therefore, what I'm trying to do is I'm in this mission to share as much as possible what we are doing, why we took certain path in our company, and so on and so forth. Okay, so who am I? My name is Luca. I'm VP of Architecture at DAZN. I'm a Google developer expert and running the London JavaScript community. So let's start from the beginning. Okay, I think many of you, or at least this is my experience, started with in a startup or a new project, greenfield project, to work on something with a hard deadline, or you need to deliver as fast as you can. So in our case, we had like roughly at the beginning 7 people to aggregate 6 different companies that were and developing not only the backend layer but also the front-end layer. That was a single-page application. A big classic, and it has to work. There is a nice requirement. It has to work not only on web and mobile, but also on around 14 different TV devices. So set-top boxes, console, web, mobile, all of them. And that is for me where usually developers shines, because there are a lot of constraints and we're not used anymore because we have these amazing quad-core computers that are rendering everything. Instead on TVs is pretty funny. So on the back end, what we have done is creating obviously a monolith. We decided to have just MongoDB for the backend, and we were like roughly internally not many people. We work with some third parties. It was an interesting journey. And then we launched the service that I will tell you in a moment what it is, and suddenly we started to see that to have success. And it was like a very nice feeling. The problem was that was a month after the release, so we didn't expect that much success. And obviously, a lot of us were thinking, okay, so now what do we do? Because we started to see some challenges, how to scale the part. We started to use, we use AWS, we are an AWS shop, so we are using heavily that part. And it was pretty nice. So I convinced the business to do an investment and work with microservices. Because obviously there is a way that we can scale the company. There is a way that we can identify the bounded context around our domain. We can start to work with domain-driven design. We start to identify what are, let's say, the best practices. Definitely there is some overhead, but overall, if you want to scale a business, that's a solution that was valid. The reality, though, is what do you do on the front end? And that was a question that I had in my career several times, because at that stage, you know, it was pretty obvious that at some point we were scaling, but scaling like blitz scaling. And it's not an easy thing, because on front end, usually you don't speak much about architecture. Usually you steal the wisdom from the past. So you look at, I don't know, MVI, DCI, you look from different type of architectures, but in reality, no one is talking about scale, because now it's becoming more complex, that ecosystem. So can we do something? That was my question at the beginning. So I think we can. It's not perfect, but it's a trade-off. Neil Ford usually says that there isn't the perfect architecture, there are only the less worse one. And I fully agree with this, because in reality it's always a trade-off. It's based on the context where you operate, it's based on the skills of your people, it's based on several things that are outside the technical part. And often we don't take in consideration that part, but as architects, as lead developer, tech leads, this is very important, because if you ignore the company structure, or you don't try to change that, you could bite yourself in a few months, and that was a huge problem. So what we came about was this architecture that was the beginning, and then we moved to this. So what we started to do is, okay, so let's think about what are the principles of microservices. So we would like to have independent releases. We would like to have decisions that are made domain by domain, business domain by business domain. I don't want to have any more a tech lead that is imposing the decision since the beginning of the project and for the next foreseeable future maintaining the same thing. That is something that honestly, when I was a developer and the tech lead, I didn't like much, but I do understand why it was like that, and the investment for the company wasn't always there, because obviously if you ask to the company, I need to rewrite an application that is, I don't know, 10 years old, it takes a lot of effort, a lot of development, and you cannot really do that. But with that, potentially we can do that. Potentially we can start to do what we are used to do on the microservices, so applying strangle pattern on the old application. And that's more or less what we have done, and I will guide you to the journey. One piece that is very important for me is the routing part. So one thing that we need to nail almost up front is how do you route between micro-frontends. And there are several ways. I will show you what we are doing on our side, but as I wrote here, you can do that on the edge, you can do on server side, you can do client side. There are plenty of possibilities. So let's try to define what is a micro-frontend, because there aren't many information out there. So for me, micro-frontend is the representation of a business subdomain, and that is very important. So we start from domain-driven design. They allow independent implementation with same or different technology. Finally, they should avoid sharing logic. I know that is very controversial because we learn something different, abstraction and other things, but it's not always the case. And finally, are owned by a single team. So those for me are the key characteristics that are important for micro-frontends, because having those characteristics allows you to work independently, to take local decision over global decision. And obviously, yes, there are, let's say, some coordination between teams. There are community of practices. There are several things that are happening outside your team. But the reality is, no one better than you that you're working on that domain can take a decision than anyone else. Because in reality, certain decision, you shouldn't get just one decision that fits them all. You need to find the right decision for your business domain. And that's why we work with that. The other thing is scaling on front-end is not a technical problem, it's a social problem. Because the reality, think about that. If you produce vast majority of the time some static files, you have the CDN that is absorbing the heat. But the reality is, when you are scaling, the the people factor, human being factor, is very, very important, way more important than infrastructure. For us, for instance, our infrastructure for front-end is pretty basic. So we have like a CloudFront distribution, we have an S3 bucket, and we store everything there, and we have a Lambda at the edge on front, and we will see later on why. But the reality is how I can have, in our case, a lot of dev centers and work with all those people accordingly, and not blocking each of them, because the communication overhead is always a pain. If you remember, if you're a developer, I remember when I was a developer, having external dependencies, it was super frustrating. And I struggled to finish my sprint every time, because you really need to nail the part, you need to wait for another team, and maybe obviously for that team is not a priority that what you're asking for, and so on and so forth. So we would like to have like a speed of delivery. We would like to have an independent implementation, and we would try to avoid sharing logic. That is something that I will come back later. So there are several companies that are embracing micro-frontends. It's not just us, and there are way more than that. New Relic is another one. We will talk about observability, so it's good to mention that. Each of them have their own way to implement that. Now, in this talk, I would like to cover what we have done, because obviously it's the part that I can go deeper and share the challenges and everything. But I'm writing a lot around the different micro-frontends architecture, so feel free to check on my Twitter account my updates. So here what we have is, I will skip for a moment the zone, but let's think about the OpenTable. OpenTable is a very interesting use case. Here in London, there was the DX team that created what they call Open Component. That is a framework that allows you to compose on the fly your micro-frontends at the server level, and serve and basically serve them like a normal page at the CDN level. So you basically hit the CDN, they absorb all the traffic, and what they do is they have a registry, like a Docker registry or NPM, with all the micro-frontends, and everyone can, from any different location, they have, if I remember well, 3 dev centers, one in Australia, one in San Francisco, and one in London, but I could be wrong. If there is a component that is interesting for you, or if there is a part of the application that could be also more complex than just a component. It could be like, I don't know, something that is present in the page, that is prominent inside the page. You can take that from the library and then merge everything, and then you can ship it. And it's pretty powerful. They made a lot of investment around the developer experience, CLI, and let's say developer experience in general, the CI, the CD, and so on. And that was one thing. And as far as I know, because we have a Skyscanner here, I know that it is also embraced by Skyscanner. Yes, it's confirmed. Well, not with a nice face, but it's nice. Interface framework is another one that Zalando was one of the first that I saw, not talking about micro-frontends, but I'm embracing the logic. At the beginning, they had what they call it's called Tailor.js, and basically they do also for them these, let's say, fact that they assemble the micro-frontends on the server side, and then they are served with them. Obviously, they have a different challenge because they have personalization and other things that they cannot be cached. But recently they move away from that pattern because they were assembling HTML fragments, and now they decided to go less purist, and they decided to go with React, and they create a library of React component, GraphQL, and basically there is an API that is describing how to compose the page, and they serve through the CDN. Again, another way to manage that. Then there is edge-side include that is running on the edge, so CDN. And the interesting part there is a language that was, let's say, they tried to be a standard with W3C, and it was proposed by Akamai. So currently, the main issue that you have with the edge-side include is the fact that not all the CDNs are using that, and therefore, if you try to have a multi-CDN strategy, or you want to migrate from one CDN to another one, you need to pay attention that you have all the functionality you're looking for. So it's another interesting one. Finally, Spotify. Spotify is using iframes. I know that probably many of you are laughing, but for the desktop application. So they move away from that implementation on the web because it was definitely not optimized at all. But if you check inside your desktop application, I like to decompose things. So you can see that they created some SPA files that are basically zip file renamed as SPA. And inside there, you have like HTML page with JavaScript and the bundle and CSS. That's it. Very simple, but it works. And it's also used by SAP. They release a framework called Luigi framework that does basically decompose that thing. But if you think about that before you laugh again, for SAP, it makes a lot of sense because they are in control of which browser the user can use because it's a B2B platform. So they can really say, listen, you know what? This one is going to work X, Y, Z. So as you can see, there are several things. So let's see what we have done. So first of all, how many of you knows DAZN? Okay, a few of them. So currently imagine this platform that is an OTT platform, similar to Netflix, but for sports. And we do mainly live sports currently in 9 countries on roughly 30 different devices nowadays. And it's interesting because obviously you have all the problems of scalability, you have all the problems of, the Champions League final is starting, so millions of users is joining the platform. Happy days. But the reality is also very interesting from the human part. So how do you scale 300 engineers all over the Europe? So at the beginning, I remember I was the second person that joined DAZN in the tech side because at the beginning they were using third-party companies, and there was the CTO was talking with me and said, listen, every time that you design something, please take in consideration also the human part. It's not just the technology part because definitely it's important, but we are going to have hundreds of people. Now you can imagine how much I was laughing when I was the second one and I was looking to the guy close to me that was the first. So it was pretty interesting. So what we have done, we started to have, let's say, quite a few teams. So fast forward a few years from 2016. Now we are from 50 that we started, we are roughly 3,000. and all over the world, not only on tech, obviously. But that is how we let's say, divide our strategy. And as you can see, there are tons of teams, and here there are missing some. Obviously, I try to get, let's say, the most prominent one, but sometimes are cross-functional teams, sometimes are not, because the problem is if you have a cross-functional team and you are designing API with one platform, all the other platforms start to complain. So you need to abstract that part and say, okay, so politic-wise, we need to define an API that is, so we have a team that is just doing backend and multiple teams that do front-end and consuming that API. It depends from the complexity of the domain, but there are some things, like for instance, the sports data team that is doing end-to-end everything. So when you see something on top of the video player, that is the sports data team that create a component on the UI that is ingesting some real-time data and is showing inside the scrub bar of the video player or other parts of the video. So it's vary, and I think that is also one of our strengths. We didn't, at the beginning, we were very fragmented. We didn't think, okay, so now we have like a bit of, I don't know, authentication and authorization in London and a bit in Amsterdam, and then we have a bit of TVs in London and another bit we have in Katowice in Poland. It was painful at the beginning, and when I thought, okay, now we are going to scale, but we're going to scale hard, so we ramp up like a dev center in Amsterdam from 0 to 140 people in 10 months, it could be a problem, because again, it's a social problem, it's more than a technical problem. So what I did at the time, I stopped everyone, including the CTO, and I said, listen, I think here we are doing something wrong, because we are designing our architecture based on our teams where they are located. But in reality, what we should do is the other thing. So the other way around, because if you know the Conway's law, that is basically stating that you design your architecture based on the company structure, you have the inverse Conway's maneuver that is doing the opposite. So you create the architecture and you structure your team based on the architecture. And this is exactly what we have done. And so far is a pretty good success. I will show you later on a few other hints on around that. Okay, so what we have done, as you have seen in the previous slide, we have created something that is called the Bootstrap. That is not the framework, CSS framework, nothing to do with that, okay? So absolutely nothing. It was just because it's the first thing that you load. What we identify, looking at data, talking with our domain expert and trying to understand how to split this monolith, was understanding the user journey, understanding how the user were consuming our platform. And then suddenly we discovered that we have like quite a lot of people that were going to landing pages, and then there was a drop of people who were going to authentication. They arrived to the payment, they didn't like the payment methods that were there, and then they never finalized the sign up. The other thing that we notice is when a user is signed up, they will never log out. They always remain there. So all the code related on the authentication, the SDK for credit card, all the other things are not useful. We download at the moment, but at the time, but it wasn't useful at all. So we know that we had to figure out something. So what we did is, okay, so we can slice our application vertically. So we can start to say, okay, we have like a landing page proxy that is loading landing page, because we have roughly hundreds of landing pages that are depending from country, depends from the device, depends from the campaign and so on. So we need something that is orchestrating a bit. Then we need an authentication bit that contains sign in, sign up, that contains retrieve email, retrieve password. Then we have another part that is the core part for DAZN, that is the discovery part. So I want a catalog, I want the best video player for live possible. I want to watch my content at any time, I want to watch in any device. Then we have the customer support part, and finally we have my account. Those are the things that we saw, we bucketized, let's say, our user journey, and we found those as prominent micro-frontends. So we decided to go with this. So we decided to take our application, split it, but there was a missing thing. How do we move from landing pages to authentication? That was the big question. Okay, so we came up with this idea of Bootstrap. That basically what it does is an app shell. Okay, so it's like a container that is the first thing that you load, and it will always be there for you the moment that you type DAZN.com or you go to a TV application. It's always there. We will see later on what it does, but at the moment, the key thing is that the Bootstrap is orchestrating these micro-frontends, and is the one that is loading or unloading the landing page and move to authentication or vice versa. So we created some rules. So the first thing is each micro-frontend has to represent a subdomain, matching the business structure. So currently, what we have done is we already have the product team that was almost, let's say, divided in the way that we divided the application, but we force certain things. And currently it's working very well because they have their dedicated team, depends from the device, but they all speak the same ubiquitous language. That was the goal. Then we wanted to have technology framework agnostic micro-frontends. And I know that a lot of people are saying, okay, but do you share some libraries? Do you, let's say, share components, stuff like that? Okay, so at the beginning, we were very, very purist. No, we didn't share anything. You have like, because of what we have seen, so for landing page, we just have React with static HTML, because we compile that, we render at compile time and we serve a static page. For authentication, we have a single page application that was made with React. But the reality is when you are in, as we saw before. So therefore, when you load the main thing, the core domain of the zone, you just load once and that's it. Also on TV, the performances are improving. So we move from, in certain device, from a startup of the application of 40 seconds to, in very old devices, to less than 20. So those kind of things, those kinds of logic were not only dedicated for web, but also, because for us it's very important, TVs. And we want to provide the possibility to pick your technology. So there was an interesting use case. Landing page guys, they saw the React hooks and they wanted to try. They tried in production, didn't say to anyone this thing. It was working. No problem at all. It was pretty simple, pretty quick. In one sprint, they replaced what they wanted to test. They put in production, was working, hit by millions of users, done. And then they shared their let's say, information. They shared what they have learned from that. That was a pretty interesting use case. Then the other thing is, I want to have a micro-frontend that is autonomous. I don't want to deploy the authentication micro-frontend, coordinating that with the discovery. I want that I can deploy just one of that, because that's the whole point. If I can do that, and I need to make some let's say, strong decisions, therefore no code duplicate, no abstractions as much as possible, I can do that. Then inside the micro-frontend, the team can share components, code styles, and so on. That is another thing that we assess. We create an independent building system. Now, I know that a lot of people would think, okay, but why you don't provide that? We provide the basics, so we have like drone that is running, but what is inside a container that is running on drone is up to the team to decide, because they can have optimization that other teams shouldn't have, or they want to translate certain things that they don't have. So they have like several plugins for Rollup and for Webpack, and they can use them, share between teams. It's not a problem at all, but that's how it works. The other important thing for me is when you have the Bootstrap loaded, you always load one micro-frontend per time. You will never compose anything on the client side. You always load a single page application or a single page, because in that case, it means that you're using the let's say, the holy trinity of JavaScript. So you use HTML, you use CSS, you use JavaScript, and you don't have to compose anything. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. If there is a new tool that you wanted to use, you will be able to. And you can also split. It happens at some point that the complexity of a domain became too big on the backend and the frontend, so we started to split the domain in two micro-frontends, and now it's working like a charm. So as I said, a micro-frontend for us is the holy trinity of frontend. An index.html, a JavaScript file for the application, a vendor JavaScript that has a high TTL on CDN, and the style CSS or wherever the team decide to have. That is how we work. So when you type DAZN.com, what happens is that you load the Bootstrap immediately, and is the part that is doing the logic. And what is responsible for is doing an application startup that is basically a set of codes to understand if you are authenticated, not authenticated, in which country you are, and other settings like feature tags and so on. It's abstracting input-output operation, therefore web storage. And I know that you say, but it's a pretty standard. Yes, unfortunately not on all the TVs. So instead of having micro-frontends that knows about each single TV that they are running, I can have agnostic micro-frontends that are running in any device, potentially. Depends from the performances, obviously. And Bootstrap is taking care about the abstraction layer. So you just expose an API to say save or get, something like that. It's routing between micro-frontends that we saw before. and is sharing configuration across multiple micro-frontends. So imagine that I'm not authenticated. I go to the authentication micro-frontend. I perform, let's say, the sign in, and I receive a token, and then I pass that to the Bootstrap. The Bootstrap store on the local storage, and the next micro-frontend that is loaded will retrieve that the JWT token from the Bootstrap and validate if it's still valid. If it's still valid, it will go ahead and show. Otherwise, it will kick out the user to another page. Now, what is the Bootstrap in reality? It's just a JavaScript file, vanilla JavaScript, nothing crazy and very light. It's loaded at the beginning, it's always there, and expose a set of APIs that are used for the micro-frontends for several things. It could be lifecycle, it could be, let's say, communication for I/O operation. So imagine that, for instance, one question I usually have at this stage is, okay, but how do you load the micro-frontend? And so we thought, what is the most basic way to load some HTML? You can use the URL, yeah, but we should need to replicate all the logic of each single micro-frontend, or HTML in reality is XML, so we can parse it. So let's parse it. So we basically tag in the HTML the tags that we are interested, and the Bootstrap is loading, and what it does is appending inside itself the different elements. That's what it does. The interesting bit of this is there are several frameworks out there that are starting as a starting point of a micro-frontend is just JavaScript. But there is a strong reason why we picked this, because we care to provide an immediate feedback to the user. So what we can do here, and certain micro-frontends are doing, are compiling at runtime a skeleton that is served immediately. The moment that we download the HTML, the user has immediate feedback, and then we start to load in background all the JavaScript, all the other stuff. And that is working on TV as well as web. So, come on, okay. So as I said, the Bootstrap exposes some methods, the lifecycle methods. So it's notifying the micro-frontend when it's finished to load and when it's finished to when it's is about to do unload, and we can use that for cleaning out the pointers. So in that case, the interesting bit we did there is we take the keys of, in the Bootstrap, we take the keys of what we have at the beginning of the application, because we loaded just the Bootstrap. And every time that there is a micro-frontend that is appending inside the Bootstrap, we we scan all the DOM nodes and JavaScript inside the window, and we take like just the keys inside the memory. And then when we unload the micro-frontend, we just remove all the things. So it's always clean. Obviously, there is, for a moment, in transition between micro-frontends, there is a moment where there is a bit of, let's say, memory overlap, but usually it doesn't hurt, and it doesn't hurt even on TV, that usually you have like strong constraint on memory. And then you have local storage and other stuff. Okay, so apart from micro-frontends, we have also the distinction of components. So I said the micro-frontends is a business representation, but we use components. We have some area of the application that are really complex. Video player for us. Having, and if you're familiar with video players, usually all the open source that you find or commercial licenses are mainly focused on VOD. But we are a live company, and the heuristics of the video player for live is completely different. So we had to spin up a team dedicated to that in order to build our own video player for all the devices. And trust me, it wasn't easy at all, because also many that we are using, for instance, one that I remember is Shaka Player. Shaka Player is maintained by Google as open source video player, and we changed the heuristic of that because it wasn't good enough. So those are the challenges that we have. So that team, what it does is exporting a component, like you have like a components library, and is embedded inside the micro-frontends like you always work. You don't have to compose anything at runtime. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You just have a library on NPM, and you just use it. Simple like that. Obviously, you need to define the contract first. So we always have, if we have some parts that are shared, we gather with the teams and the architects, and we try to figure out what are the APIs that we need in order to manage the model there. But when we define that, they can work in parallel, and it's not a problem. The other interesting bit that I decided to add is the Cannery Release thing. So the company asked me, can we have a way to, in general, not wait for building all the micro-frontends and deploy them? And there, at the beginning, I was a bit puzzled because I said, yes, on microservices, there's no problem, but on front-end, what do we have? So because our architecture was very simple, cloud front-end S3, I thought, okay, let's try Lambda the Edge. Lambda the Edge, if you're not familiar, it can be triggered in 4 stages when there is a viewer request, origin response, and viewer response. And what it does is you can add logic on the edge. So you don't hit, let's say you hit the closest AWS dev center, the data center, where the request is coming from. And in that case, you can orchestrate certain things. So what we have done basically is so we started to say, okay, we want to deploy in a specific country on a specific browser or device, and we want to deploy that, and every time there is another request, boom, it goes to 1.0. So that allows us to do many and incremental deployment per day than before. It was a nightmare, in particular for TV. So the other nice thing is we decided to go a very deep granularity, so country and browser, because it depends from the browser what kind of video player you need to use. And that was pretty interesting because I have if you search on YouTube, there is a talk that I did at reInvent about this with the AWS. It was an interesting topic. We also managed to do SEO through that, so we can redirect the crawler to specific pages that are dedicated only for crawlers. And surprise, surprise, we discovered that also Amazon is doing that with Amplify. They are doing, when you deploy something on Amplify, they are switching the things together. It was a pretty nice understanding that we were on the right track. Okay, so as I said, the DAZN structure on the DDD part is something like that. So we try to take all the things that you have seen so far and map our teams in this way. So we define, following DDD, the core domain, the generic domain, and the core and supporting domain. And we mapped our teams in our company in this way. And then what we have done is saying, okay, perfect, where is the core team? Where it's based? But London, we have all the POs and all the marketing people, so probably we need to iterate fast on this because this is our core business. Generic is Amsterdam, so we have all the payments guys that are managing my account, help onboarding, front-end, back-end, all the partnership and everything. And basically, the person that is far from you is like a couple of steps. So it's pretty good because then there is cross-contamination between Dev Center, but it was pretty good. Core supporting in Katowice because we have a lot of TVs and we found, let's say, a pretty nice place there. And also for mobile native teams. We have also some backend stuff, but we are moving to London. Then we have a global team. There is my team, DX, so developer experience, cloud engineers, and SREs. And all together, basically, we are supporting those teams. Okay, so what we achieved. So first of all, when we were scaling up, one day I arrived to the office and I have like 5 new teams that joined in London, and basically they were working on the same project in 3 weeks. The nice thing was they were capable after, because they have the freedom to take certain decision and use the technology they want, they were able to let's say, do in the first sprint already provide some value for the company and deliver something, because all the automation was sorted out and they started to have the first part on the UI. Now we have over 300 techies, 350 techies that are working on the same platform. There are obviously some part that are backend, some part that are frontend, but and some part are back office, some part are the layer that is hit by the users, and so on and so forth. But it's really difficult arriving to that in 1.5 years. And having those guys that are creating value for the company, not for also for the scalability issues and the challenges that we have, but also because those people, it's the first time that they work together. And for instance, in Amsterdam, we have 24 different countries there. So there is a huge diversity, and it's not easy at all. But we were able to make it work. The other interesting thing, we de-risk our releases. So it's like 2 years that we don't have an S1 incident. We do multiple releases per day. I remember at the beginning we did, in the first week, 26 release of the video player. And we were literally switching, turning on, turning off the different part, so which browser and which country where we wanted to test it. And we were testing in real time in production, then go back if it didn't work. And then we doubling our user base every year. So at the beginning, you know, when you have like few users is one thing. When you start to have millions and millions, it starts to become more complex. That's it for me. I know that maybe you have several questions, so I left some time for that.